People have been speculating, guessing, and whispering about me for a very long time. Some made up my tale, while others believed they already knew it. I always kept quiet and grinned because I thought that being silent was a sign of power. But now that I'm 53, I understand that grief can sometimes be concealed by silence. I want to tell the truth today. I'm sharing what I've held for years because I finally have peace in my heart, not to defend myself or make news. It's a common misconception that being a gospel singer means you're constantly happy, resilient, and full of faith. However, that isn't the real world. There is a human being behind the worship songs, the bright lights, and the music who occasionally feels worn out, damaged, and unsure. I believed for years that in order to inspire others, I had to be flawless. But God wants us to be honest, not perfect. Thus, this is not an admission of guilt. It's an admission of humanity. I held something for years that many people guessed, but I never acknowledged. I was having trouble with feeling lost within my faith, not with faith per se. I'm now at last prepared to share that tale. Sinach's tale is one of rediscovery rather than success or celebrity. She carried the expectations of the world on her shoulders for years, thinking that silence was a sign of strength. However, life has a way of showing us that even the loudest voices can occasionally become dull. Finding it again is what counts. At 53, Sinach has completed the circle. She now understands that faith is about trusting God in the face of imperfection rather than acting as though everything is flawless. Her calm was waiting in the quiet honesty she had been avoiding. It was never found in the lights, the music, or the acclaim. By acknowledging her difficulties, she discovered her humanity rather than losing her reputation. Her best song, which speaks louder than any music, is her honesty. It conveys to everyone hearing that although even believers have setbacks, grace always enables us to get back up. Sinach's admission serves as a reminder that you can inspire people without concealing your suffering. Your openness can sometimes be the message that makes someone else feel better. She transformed her quiet into truth and her vulnerability into strength. Her narrative serves as a gentle reminder to all of us as she continues on her journey. It's acceptable to take a break, to be exhausted, and to be authentic. God only desired sincerity, He never required perfection. And that's what makes her revelation so beautiful. After all the years, all the music, and all the expectations, Sinach finally acknowledged what we had all suspected, that every strong voice is a human heart that is still learning, still trusting, and still trying to find peace. Setting the scene, her rise to stardom. Growing up in Nigeria, I was surrounded by music and religion. I was a quiet girl with lofty goals that occasionally seemed unattainable. Despite our lack of resources, my family's love and faith were sufficient. My ministry and escape came via music. I used to sing in local church choirs because it brought me closer to God, not because I wanted to be famous. I was overwhelmed when my first songs started to gain popularity. People informed me how Waymaker transformed their life and how my music eased their suffering. I was terrified as well as appreciative and amazed. I felt more pressure to never make mistakes as more people looked up to me. All of a sudden, I was Sinach the symbol rather than just Sinach the singer. Each performance was heavier than the previous one. Because I believed that people expected someone who sings for God to be flawless, I wanted to be flawless. But I gradually stopped listening to myself since I was trying so hard to please everyone. I overlooked the fact that the girl who sang in that small church was simply seeking tranquility rather than recognition. The quiet battle. There was a moment when I was silently fighting inner emptiness while singing songs about faith and triumph. I lost my sense of connectedness to God, but I didn't lose faith in Him. Even though I was still smiling and performing, I felt aloof on the inside. I would lead thousands of people in praise while traveling from show to concert, but when I returned to my hotel room, I would cry by myself. It's odd how feeling successful can occasionally make you feel insignificant. Nobody notices your struggles, but everyone sees your blessings. Sinach, you're such a strong woman of faith, people said to me. In actuality, though, I was exhausted. I was mentally, emotionally, and spiritually spent. I continued to give until I had nothing left over for myself. I had no idea how to tell anyone. How do you let the world know that the author of a song about faith is having difficulty experiencing that same faith? I concealed it as a result. I performed, went on interviews, put on to be echoing off the ceiling. Nevertheless, I felt aware of God's presence even in that quiet. I simply couldn't feel Him the way I used to. The pivotal moment, I sat by myself in my hotel room one evening following a concert. The lights were down, the clapping had subsided, and I finally had some peace. Who are you now? I recall asking myself as I gazed at myself in the mirror. The figure staring back at me was unfamiliar to me. I had all the things I had wished for, including influence, success, and music, but I lacked serenity. I had a breakdown that evening. I sobbed for hours, wondering whether God could still hear me. I told him that I was sick of acting tough all the time, and I sensed a change in that silence. I came to see that all God ever wanted was my heart, and I had been pursuing approval from others, admirers, and even myself. At that moment, I realized that faith is a relationship rather than a show. You can trust it even if you can't always feel it. That night, I made the decision to give up running and begin being truthful with God, myself, and eventually the outside world. What she finally admits in her confession. What am I at last acknowledging? I acknowledge that I have had difficulties, that I was secretly battling my darkness for years while others saw my brightness. I'm acknowledging that I've questioned myself, felt lost, and asked God, why me? People have always assumed that there was more suffering than I revealed in my Psalms, and they were correct. I composed every line from a place of intense feeling and silent struggle. Waymaker was my call for assistance, not merely a psalm of thanksgiving. I was singing it as a reminder that God was still at work, even though I couldn't see the way. At last, I acknowledge that I'm not always powerful. At last, I acknowledge that even religious people have fatigue. However, I also acknowledge that each tear moved me nearer to the reality that God's love is received via surrender rather than being earned via perfection. And I was transformed by that surrender. The process of healing. It took time for healing to occur. I had to distance myself from the cacophony of social media, tours, and even certain relationships. I had to remain still. I journaled, prayed, and rediscovered what it was like to be at peace on quiet mornings. There were days when I discovered it and days when I didn't. However, I gradually began breathing once more. I surrounded myself with my family, my spouse, and close friends who served as reminders of who I am outside of the stage. The singer, Sinach, caught them off guard. They cherished Sinach as an individual, and no spotlight could ever fully cure me like that love did. I discovered the most important lesson of my life during that time. If you are empty, you cannot pour into others. Without relaxation, ministry breeds suffering. I started writing once more, but this time for serenity rather for charts or glory. My prayers became music, my songs became therapy, and I felt liberated for the first time in years. The faith communities and fans' reaction. I had no idea what to anticipate when I eventually discussed my difficulties in public. However, the reaction was enormous. Instead of criticizing, people made connections. Pastors, choir members, mothers, and young believers from all across the world sent messages stating, I felt the same way. I became aware that I wasn't by myself. Others were able to be authentic because of my honesty. Many confided in me that they had been reluctant to acknowledge their own burnout or lack of faith. At that moment, I realized that vulnerability is a strength rather than a weakness. I assisted others in discovering their truth by sharing mine. In private, several gospel singers expressed their struggles with the burden of expectations. That helped me realize that sometimes our honesty, rather than our music, is our greatest outreach. Thoughts and life lessons. In retrospect, I can see that everything, even the suffering, had a purpose. I learned empathy from those gloomy nights. I learned humility from their tears. I learned how to genuinely listen to God, other people, and myself from that quiet. I no longer use accolades or recognition to gauge my performance. Peace is how I gauge it. I have a straightforward message for anyone listening. You can love God and still face difficulties. Even if you serve faithfully, you may still require assistance. How genuine your religion is more important than how flawless it appears. God only wanted me to be honest. He never asked me to be perfect. And that's what I now choose every day. Truth over performance, tranquility over pressure, and honesty over image. At 53, I've discovered that acknowledging your suffering strengthens rather than weakens your faith. I discovered that being vulnerable is a sign of freedom rather than defeat. And I've discovered that often the most moving